Well, hello there, dear listener. Welcome to Talk About Talk, episode number 132, The Power of Listening. This is a re-release of episode number 88. And since we released that episode over a year and a half ago, we've also introduced YouTube to our mix. So now, instead of just listening to this episode on listening, you can also watch it on YouTube. Yeah, we've gone multimedia. But I have to say, there's something special about audio, isn't there, about listening? Listening is intimate. I've had this experience a couple times recently where Talk About Talk listeners have gone to my website and they've signed up for a free 20-minute consult. That means I meet with them one-on-one in a Zoom meeting. Yes, it's free. And yes, I hope that you will do the same. Anyway, a couple times recently, these listeners, they asked me to pause and they had a big smile on their face. Anyway, a couple times when I met with one of these listeners one-on-one, they would have a big smile on their face and they'd say something like, "Andrea, I can't believe I'm talking to you one-on-one. I listen to you all the time. And I feel like I already know you, even though we've never met." Here's the thing. There really is something special about an audio experience, about listening, isn't there? Over the past few years, I've shared a conviction of mine that's related to this. And the conviction is this: if I had to choose one communication superpower, it would be listening. Listening is underappreciated, and it's a challenge for many. It's also often what distinguishes great leaders from not so great leaders. Over the next 18 minutes, as you listen to this episode, I encourage you to challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to advance, not just from passive to active listening, but beyond active listening to collaborative or generative listening. Are you ready? Let's do this. Shh. Quiet. Do you hear that? It occurred to me that for this episode in particular, there's some chance I'll be preaching to the choir. And that choir is you podcast listeners. Listeners. Yep, we're focusing in this episode on our listening skills. Here's an interesting insight. Some experts have noted that as a society, our listening skills are deteriorating. That's kind of sad, isn't it? How's this possible? Well, more and more of us are spending more of our time watching videos, and we are a visually oriented society. But I certainly have not lost hope for us. Why? Well, first of all, listening skills is absolutely one of the most common topic requests that I get for coaching and for workshops. Ambitious executives across industries are focusing on improving their listening skills. And secondly, podcast listenership continues to grow. Yes, listenership is up. I love that word, listenership.
Ooh.
So here's the good news for you, dear podcast listener. If the experts are right, and as a society, our listening skills are deteriorating, well, then there may be a huge opportunity for some of us, for you to truly stand out based on your listening skills.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Greetings and welcome to Talk About Talk. I'm your communication coach, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Please call me Andrea. Are you an ambitious executive with a growth mindset, looking to advance your career? Well, you're in the right place. At Talk About Talk, we focus on communication skills topics like personal branding, confidence, networking, and yes, listening. This is the critically important stuff that they don't teach you in school. It's what takes you from a B+ to an A+ in whatever it is that you do. And if you check out the talkabouttalk.com website, you'll find online corporate training, one-on-one coaching with me, the archive of this bi-weekly podcast, and the free weekly communication skills newsletter. I really hope you'll go to the website and sign up for the free weekly communication skills training newsletter. But you can choose whatever works for you. Welcome to Talk About Talk episode number 88, The Power of Listening. Listening skills are in my opinion, the number one communication superpower. If you're not listening, it's not communication. It's just a monologue. As TED Talk listening expert Julian Treasure says, every human needs to listen consciously in order to live fully. We could all use a primer on improving our communication skills. Whether you're in an online meeting, engaging in small talk, or sitting around the dinner table, active listening with intent, can make all the difference. In this episode, you'll learn the 3 levels of listening, a listening hierarchy, if you will, plus specific strategies and actionable tactics that will help you elevate your listening skills. Let's get into this. As always, you don't need to take notes because I do that for you. I'll briefly summarize everything for you at the end of this episode, and you can always access the show notes on the talkabouttalk.com website. So, while you're listening, you can just keep doing whatever you're doing. Driving or walking or housework or whatever. You don't have to take notes because I do that for you. Okay, let me start with this. Think in your mind for a minute about communication. What do you think about? Well, when most of us think about communication, we're thinking about talking, not listening. Am I right? The talking part comes naturally. The listening part, not so much. Well, if you listen to podcasts, then at some level, you probably get it that listening requires focus and it's an effective way to learn. That said, listening is not easy. As playwright George Bernard Shaw says, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We are wired to focus on ourselves. Our favorite topic is anything to do with me, and our favorite word is our own name. Not only are we selfish and focused on ourselves, we're also easily distracted, especially nowadays. We've got notifications coming up all the time on our phone, on our computer. We're distracted. We're also really, really smart, and that means that our mind wanders, and we're not listening. Here's the good news. As I said, listening can be learned. It helps immensely to start with understanding the types or levels of listening. You can think in terms of a hierarchy. There are 3 levels of listening. Well, actually 4, but we won't include level 0, which is when you're totally disengaged, when you're not listening at all, when you're being rude. The 3 levels are passive listening, active listening. You've probably heard of those 2, right? And then the third one is collaborative listening. Let me describe each of them for you. So, passive listening. Unfortunately, this is our default. This is when we're pretending to listen. We're not interrupting. We're waiting our turn to interject. We're waiting for the speaker to pause so we can make our point. This is where we listen for what we already know. And most of us are listening passively most of the time. But when we sit up and pay attention, that's when we can elevate our listening to the next level, active listening. This means listening with focused intent and empathy. This means focusing on the other person, active listening. The third and ultimate level of listening is what we call collaborative listening. This is the ultimate stage of listening. So you're listening with intent, with empathy, but you're also collaborating with the other person or people, and you're learning. You're considering others' input as a key ingredient for whatever your goal is. Think of it as collaborative dialogue. Or think of the term synergies. It's synergistic. You're creating something that's bigger than the sum of the parts. So those are the 3 levels of listening: passive, active, and the ultimate, collaborative listening. So the next question is, how do we elevate our listening to this ultimate level of collaborative listening? Well, I offer you 3 main strategies. Are you ready? They're focus, ask questions, and track the ratio. I'm going to take you through a few ideas for each of these tactics, and you can maybe choose 1 or 2 that will work best for you. Okay, the first strategy is focus. But focus on what? Well, focus on the other person, focus on your goal, and focus on the 3 levels of listening. So first, focusing on the other person. This simply means thinking about and considering with intent, not yourself, not what you're going to say, but on the other person. Of course, you need to think about their words, but this goes beyond words. Consider their body language too, their facial expression, their posture, their eyes. What are they really saying? Think about their intent, their purpose, and their motivation. The second thing to focus on is your goal. Ask yourself, why am I here? What am I trying to accomplish? I gotta tell you, this is one that I use a lot. Whenever my mind wanders, I ask myself, what is my immediate purpose? This is about being mindful. So avoid distractions and put away your phone. Turn off notifications. Make it easy for yourself to focus. No multitasking. This is about monotasking. I love that term. If you're in a meeting and you find your mind wandering, remind yourself, what is the meeting objective? But also, what is my personal or my professional objective? Why am I here? And as I said, you can also focus on the 3 levels of listening. Do you remember what they were? Passive, active, and collaborative listening. So that's the first strategy, focus. Focus on the other person, focus on your goal, and focus on the 3 levels of listening. Honestly, if you can accomplish that, you're well on your way. The second strategy to elevate your listening is to ask questions. I have a question for you. Do you know who Tim Ferriss is? Amongst other things, Tim Ferriss is a productivity guru. He's an author and a very successful podcaster. He wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek. Yeah, that Tim Ferriss. Do you know what he says? Tim says, quote, "The way you become world-class is by asking good questions." So when I think about questions in the context of listening, I think about asking lots of questions and I think about asking good questions. So it's quantity and quality. So first, quantity, asking lots of questions. Ask as many questions as you can. You want to think about absorbing what the other person is telling you, as opposed to solving or resolving. How can you do that? By asking questions. I learned this one from legal veteran Norm Bacall. Challenge yourself to absorb, not solve, not resolve. And I know it's hard for many of us, myself included, but just absorb, and you can do so by asking questions. Of course, I understand. You are an executive with expertise, and you need to demonstrate that expertise and offer advice to your clients or even to your colleagues. Trust me, I find myself in this situation all the time. Like when I'm in a one-on-one coaching session with a client and they're paying me for my expertise and my advice. But I know that if I can ask them lots of questions and great questions, the session is going to be a lot more successful. You can knock it out of the park when you first listen to your client and ask lots of questions. We also want to ask great questions, quality. And yeah, the most obvious advice here is almost a cliche. We should ask open-ended questions and avoid yes-no questions. So we can do things like try questions that start with why or how. We could also try asking people to share stories. This is a great tactic. So if you're following up with someone about a meeting, instead of saying, "Did the meeting go well?" Instead, ask, "Tell me about the meeting. How did it go?" You're implicitly asking for a story. So what are some other great questions to ask? Well, you could start with tell me about or tell me more. Or you could take the advice of my friend Norman Bacall, the legal veteran that I mentioned earlier. You could ask the question that he asks his clients. He asks them, "What keeps you up at night?" That is a fantastic question, isn't it? What keeps you up at night? Another thing you could do is ask questions that include the other person's words. This is a really effective strategy that I learned when I was a doctoral student at Harvard Business School. I was doing qualitative research, ZMET research, guided by my professor, Jerry Zalman. And he encourages us to probe with the person's own words. Let me give you an example. If someone says, "This is so difficult," you simply ask, Difficult? If someone says, I felt so embarrassed, you just say, you felt so embarrassed? This technique demonstrates that you're listening, and it can really help you learn more. The respondent feels compelled to share more information. It takes practice, and it might even feel a bit awkward when you start, but I promise you, it works well. So that's asking great questions. Ask open-ended questions, encourage people to tell stories, and use the other person's words. Yay! And that's the second strategy for how to elevate your listening. We covered focusing, and we covered asking questions. Asking lots of questions and asking great questions. Great questions are open-ended, they encourage people to tell stories, and they often use the other person's words. The third strategy to elevate your listening is to track the ratio, as in track the ratio of you talking versus the other person talking. As Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, said, quote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That's exactly the ratio that I'm talking about here. There are 2 main reasons to track the ratio of you talking versus the other person talking. The first is learning. The more they talk and the more you listen, the more you're going to learn. The second reason to track the ratio is that the more they talk and the more you listen, the more they'll like you. Research shows that when you provide other people with the opportunity to talk more, they will like you more. I've even seen research that concludes that when job applicants encourage their interviewer to talk more during their job interview, those are the folks that are more likely to get the job. Interesting, right? And good to know. And by the way, I have to highlight something else here. Introverts. In episode number 82, we went into detail about the differences between introverts and extroverts. And sometimes introverts get a bad name. But here's the thing. Introverts may be better listeners. They're quieter. Typically, they're listening, not talking. Their ratio of talking versus listening may be something that we should all aspire to. While they're listening, they're learning more, and they might even be making us like them more. So this seems simple enough, right? Whatever your context, try to track the ratio and minimize the amount that you're talking and maximize the amount of listening. But here are 2 things to consider in terms of tracking the ratio that'll help elevate it even further. The first one, track not just your ratio, but the ratio of everyone else in the room. This is a fantastic opportunity for you to demonstrate your leadership skills. Consider everyone's relative airtime. If someone hasn't spoken, encourage them to speak up. Ask them an open-ended question. And then, as my friend Jill Nicolation suggests, hold space to let them talk. And speaking of holding space, the second thing to consider in terms of tracking the ratio is embracing the silence. Don't race to fill the silence. Oftentimes, you'll learn the most from someone following that moment of awkward silence. Look the person in the eye and nod. Don't say a word. Sometimes the right word is no words. As they say, silence is golden. So that's track the ratio. And that's the 3 strategies I offer to help you elevate your listening. It's focus, ask questions, and track the ratio. Got it? If you're still listening, I have some homework for you. Here's your homework for the week. In every interaction that you have, professionally and even personally, challenge yourself to listen. Not just passively waiting for your turn to talk. Not even actively listening with intent and purpose, but by listening collaboratively. Do this by asking questions, focusing, and tracking the ratio. Please let me know how it goes. Okay, that's it. Again, you can find the show notes for this episode and all episodes on the talkabouttalk.com website. Just click on the podcast tab and you'll find it all there. And while you're on the talkabouttalk.com website, I really hope you'll sign up for the weekly newsletter. This is your chance to get free communication skills coaching from me every week in a simple to digest email. Just go to talkabouttalk.com to sign up or email me directly and I'll add you to the list. You can email me anytime at Andrea@talkabouttalk.com. Thanks for listening. I really mean it. Thanks for listening and talk soon.